Emergency Preparedness Committee meeting for the Brunswick-Glynn County Joint Water Sewer Commission of Thursday, August 1st to order. I'll lead us in invocation, and Commissioner Elliott, you mind leading us in the pledge? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your many and abundant blessings. Thank you for allowing us to be involved in useful and beneficial work for the betterment of our community. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to work together, and we ask you for your guidance and that you give us wisdom as we meet and make decisions on behalf of our community. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have anybody for public comment?
No, sir.
All righty. So this is our first meeting of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, so we don't have any minutes or anything. Get right into the discussion. Jay, staff training and readiness report.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, gentlemen, you'll see before you one document from the Emergency Operations Plan. The Emergency Operations Plan is a binder, so it's fairly comprehensive, and as far as the ins and outs, the SOP more or less for emergency response, all hazards incident response. But for the sake of this meeting, we were only going to discuss this one incident action plan guideline related to hurricane. We have one completed related to flooding and winter storms, for instance, but then each incident action plan guideline becomes a good, for lack of a better phrase, a rip and run checklist that's used to guide staff in the event of a named hurricane that is threatening to impact us. Please turn to page 14, or really beginning on page 15, for the portion that I'm going to speak about now. We'll go into more detail regarding the earlier sections in the incident action plan guideline, but what I want to talk about in particular is the staff roster, more or less. So as far as staff training and readiness goes, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the incident command structure. We follow a well-established FEMA standard to facilitate integration with other agencies, non-governmental organizations, and other area partners. You'll notice within this roster, 4 sections represented in the hurricane plan. We prepare various staff to not only fill the operations section, which is what you picture as being our day-to-day core business, but also the planning section, that would be those that guide our most effective response efforts. The finance and administration section, those would be staff that determine immediate funding for resources needed during the response and how to document time and materials used for potential FEMA reimbursement. And then the logistics section, those that help secure and distribute the resources that are needed during the response phase. All staff are trained upon hire to be prepared for this structure so that each has an understanding of how they fit into the big picture, because roles may change during response. Your day-to-day responsibility may be completely shifted once we go into being prepared for an oncoming storm, and then we shift people around as needed. So this as a roster, we have 85 listed here. We went over that yesterday with staff, and there are some tentative spaces, gaps that need to be filled, and as far as the red and some blanks. Before we have a named storm, we get back together and we determine who needs to go where to make sure that we have full coverage. And then let's also talk about the training matrix. What gets people prepared to be able to serve as Tier 1 staff? According to more or less an industry standard, all utility employees are considered Tier 1, essential staff. Under city and county government, we may have on the badges essential versus non-essential, critical, non-critical, but all of our utility staff are considered essential because this is a life-giving utility. If we had an evacuation, our staff needs to be prepared to stand services back up before reentry. So we make use of 213 active independent study classes that are free, no cost to us, through FEMA's website that help us reach our preparedness goal. We have 6 components of that preparedness goal. Rapidly restore utility services after an emergency, ensure adequate water supply for fire suppression, minimize water and water system damage, minimize impact and loss to customers, minimize negative impacts on public health and employee safety, and finally, provide emergency public information regarding customer service. And that's customer services, not customer service paying your bill. All of our staff, upon hire, take what's referred to as IS 100, Intro to the Incident Command System, and IS 700, Intro to the National Incident Management System, and then more are taken dependent upon level of supervision, need, or interest. 6 have taken the initiative to complete the FEMA Professional Development Series, which includes the following classes, all of which help take our entire preparedness level up a notch with their contribution to improve the emergency operations plan. So classes such as an introduction to exercises, fundamentals of emergency management, emergency planning, leadership and influence, decision-making and problem-solving, effective communication, developing and managing volunteers. Once somebody gets through that type of course of study, to me, it's virtually the equivalent of having an associate's degree in emergency management. But you can count on that person to be able to put together exercises and train staff. So that's something we'll talk about more in greater detail later. And then 9 staff members have completed intermediate and advanced incident command classes in class, not the independent study that's done online, giving us a more competent staff that demonstrates to our community that we're focused on preparing leaders that may be called upon when there's an escalating an emergency that may cause us to respond with multiple agencies. Not only does your day-to-day job change regarding what you do for our agency, but you may find that you're serving under another agency. We may be called upon to, don't think about hurricanes in particular, but let's say that there's any type of incident that we have staff that are qualified to go serve under somebody else. Somebody from FLETC that we have a relationship with may come in and say, do you have 6 staff that can go help me do this type of work? So that's part of what we do as part of that agency partnership, is be prepared to serve with others regardless of the circumstances. So it may sound academic to say that we want to be able to provide equipment, resources, and staff to assist those that are in need, but you have to think, during Hurricane Irma, we did just that. Jekyll called on us. They had some significant main breaks, main arteries, and we sent our water distribution staff over to assist them with repairing mains. So we may be called on to do even greater things. So we also maintain a relationship with Glynn County Emergency Management Agency, especially through our commitment to the local emergency planning committee, and seek professional in-class course study through the Georgia Emergency Management Agency and FEMA when those classes are available. And we train with other partners and keep them informed on how our emergency operations plan impacts their efforts. We have an annual tabletop exercise, which most of you have been to at some point or another, in which we're engaged and we're saying, this is what's going to happen if a hurricane's going to threaten our community, and then others have to edit their plans in order to accommodate. Having said that, I think Andrew has some points regarding those lessons that we've learned from the past storms.
Do y'all have any questions about the training that we've been doing or anything like that?
No, I don't have a question about training, but I have some questions about the staffing.
Yes, sir.
I see we have here under the Joint Public Safety Emergency Operations Center, we have a lot of customer service reps. I'm trying to figure out what's the need for that.
It's a very good question. When we had our staff at Academy Creek being prepared to respond, what we didn't have is staff staged at either the Pate Building or the Emergency Operations Center, depending on where they call us to. They have asked for us to contribute on account of over 60% of the calls that go into Glynn County customer service following both of those incidents were related to water and sewer outages. So we need to have some skin in the game and commit to be able to assist them with those calls. They were documenting the calls that came in, but they didn't know anything to do other than to shout at either myself, Todd Klein.
Wasn't no calls coming into you?
No, sir. This system's shut down. We don't receive calls here when the admin office is closed.
I know right here, but over there, the calls didn't come directly into you?
Yes, sir. They were routed to me through the 911 center, but Glynn County customer service maintains their primary line. So citizen calls, you think 411. If you're looking to see, if you're in Atlanta, for instance, and you're wondering if the services are up or down, they have a, during the recovery phase and then the reentry phase, they have an onslaught of calls from outside of Glynn County because that's the number that's published. We speak with one voice. Glynn County is announcing 554, whatever the phone number is.
Sure.
And then folks from all over are calling that number to see, can I get back into Glynn County? That's during Matthew, more the case than Irma. And customer service with Glynn County has a number of staff there to answer customer calls, but they get overwhelmed, and so they've asked for us to contribute to that cause as well.
Yeah, but we pay them to do that. That's their job to do. I mean, they should have a relationship. Doesn't John Warren still pay to the 911 center?
No, sir, we're not speaking of the 911 center.
Don't we, for the, okay.
This is customer service, Glynn County customer service, not the 911 center. So the calls that go into the public safety complex are emergency calls. These are non-emergency calls. These are restaurants calling, wondering whether they can reopen. Those calls do get routed to the EOC for the sake of
Right.
my partner, in this case, Dana Reed and Caleb Head, in GIS support are documenting the services being up or down, and then they're responding in kind to Joey and I to put out the word that particular
So-
areas may or may not
So
have
you
service.
need 4 representatives to do that?
We
Is
need
it shift work?
shift work, yes, sir. We need 2 seats. We're going to fill 2, and they're going to be 12 on, 12 off.
Okay.
Basically, when you look at this roster, it is with the intent to run 2 12-hour shifts a day. So that's why you have at least 2 of everything on the list, so that.
Well, also, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but also looking at finance, what do we need finance there for?
Finance is the function that takes in all of our information and inputs it into our CityWorks system so that we can keep track of our FEMA reimbursements. In the past storms, we did not have that function fully fleshed out, and it was a nightmare trying to get all that information to FEMA after the fact. What their function is now is when a work crew comes back in for the day, they'll write down what they did, rather than asking a gentleman that's been working for 12 hours out in the pouring down rain to go on a computer and put that in at that point. He passes that to the finance staff so that we have that FEMA documentation ready to go. There are utilities very close to us, St. Johns County, for example, in Jacksonville. They use CityWorks, and they file for their FEMA reimbursement within 3 days of Hurricane Irma.
And our finance, by having our finance on staff, like our finance, section chief, deputy chief, staff 1, staff 2, staff 3, isn't that a little excessive?
Well, remember, you're doing 2 shifts again, so
I-
you'll have at least 2 people on at all times, and you have multiple people to input work orders. You've got, I'm gonna guess, just, I haven't counted them up, 15 or 20 crews working out at a time, and you don't wanna start a backlog of work orders have to be put in at that time.
Well, there's gonna be time when it be dead time anyhow. There was a
there will
lot of dead time that we had over there. I was over there.
Yes, sir.
And there was time that people was doing nothing, just waiting. So I'm just saying, you know, we seem to be staffing up really large for, we actually don't know. So I imagine the first time probably be good then.
Yes, sir, and what I will say, last year, we prepared a response for Hurricane Michael when it looked like we could get some impacts from that. We had a roster that looked like this going into the week, and then we parsed that down as we got closer to the event to what we thought was going to be necessary. From looking at what that storm was probably going to do to us, we realized there probably wasn't going to be a great deal of problems with the water system. It was mostly going to be power outages
Right.
and trees down, so we kept sewer crews on hand and had 1 water crew and didn't have as many finance people there because we weren't looking at a 5-day response. So we did parse it down as we got more information closer to the event.
Okay, well, it seems very excessive that we have quite a bit of number of people. However, does FEMA reimburse us for all our people being on staff, being on duty?
Yes, sir. Provided that they are
If it-
working on a task related to disaster response, they will reimburse us. Yes, sir.
So how much was the last time, we had, the last storm, reimbursement for personnel?
Dollar-wise,
Rough estimate.
The number of personnel probably hasn't changed much since the last event, except for the customer service edition because of the Glynn County request. So if you're looking at 80 people for 5 days,
Roughly?
probably high 6 figures reimbursement on that point, because most of the folks are getting overtime for the vast majority of that
Right.
period.
What about the salary team members? How do we?
Well, the salaried team members, it has been done differently in the past, and that's something that we probably need to get a formalized position on. Glynn County pays all of their salaried personnel premium pay during a response, which they get double paid just like the non-salaried personnel. There have been storms in the past where Joint Water and Sewer elected to do that, and there have been storms where salaried personnel just work for salary. Just work for salary. So that, really, we need to get a consistent policy on that, and that needs to be something that we run through the HR committee just to verify, because FEMA will only reimburse you for what is written in your policy. So if your policy says you're not going to pay premium pay, and then you pay premium pay, you're only gonna get half of that back.
Yeah,
So you
exactly.
gotta make sure it's documented. FEMA's very much about what was your plan going into the event,
Right.
and we'll reimburse you for what you planned for, not what you figured out after the fact.
What I've seen, and, you know, I think we probably should find out what other utilities do. And what I've seen is that in other places, is hourly team members get premium pay.
Right.
And salaried team members get something, but it's not equivalent to time and a half.
Right.
You know, and, you know, their salary, they do get something. I mean, and I think we should give them something. I mean, that's obviously a huge commitment. I don't know that we should give,
And-
for
Right.
example, time and a
It's
half.
it's more or less a mandatory commitment, right?
Right, yeah.
In an emergency situation.
In an emergency situation, basically, if you're a salaried personnel, you are required to be here unless we have made prior arrangements to make sure that you don't have to be. We have some salaried personnel that have family members that require medical attention, that they have to be there for them in an event where they're not going to have normal care. So they have made other arrangements, but typically, everybody on salary is here during an event.
Right. I feel really good about our crews being out and being on call and whatever stage. The admin, I mean, the finance part, unless you prove to us that we really actually need that,
Yes,
you
sir.
know, that's be something that we'll look at hard, I think, to look at even harder at standing them up, as many as we do here.
Well, and I think part of that depends on what the policy says. If they're salaried team members, then, and we, you know, we're not doing a time and a half premium pay, then there's really no cost associated with it.
Yeah, but there should be a cost associated with it, I think. and
I think we
need
should pay people something.
Yeah.
Right, right, I agree with that.
to- And put
Oh,
it,
and that's
get it into our policy, and
That's
I
right.
guess sooner rather than later.
And-
Hurricane season's upon us.
Well,
but,
hurricane season is certainly here now, and to your point, Mayor, we have been talking if there are ways with some of these, now, I'm using the term admin, I don't specifically mean that admin section
I know
here,
what
but
you're
of
talking
those administrative functions, are there overlaps that we can combine some groups together? As you get further into the response, it's more likely you can combine them. When you get that first day after something happens,
Right.
it's pretty chaotic, and so things are stretched pretty thin at that point, so it's.
And to be able to pare it down depending on the storm.
Right.
I think
This would,
prepare and then, so you don't underperform.
I would say, unless we're looking at a direct hit from a significant storm, this would be the most people we would ever stand up at one time. And that would be for a major, major event. Now, if we had a evacuation scenario where everybody had to evacuate, even the first responders, and then come back in after the fact, we might call a few more people in at that point, just because you just don't know what's going to happen. But for something we're gonna ride out, we're not gonna call in more people than this.
Where are we housing these people?
They're being housed in the 5 locations actually, because you have the Dunbar Creek wastewater plant on the island that has 2 people there. You have the Exit 29 plant that has 2 people there. So outside of those 4 people, you have people at the EOC, the GIS folks, Jay and Joey, and then the customer service folks, be it EOC or at the PAPE building.
And there's housing out there, there's a place for you to stay?
There's places to stay. The vast majority of people sleep in the warehouse at Academy Creek. We have cots and stuff that they bring. We have cots available. A lot of people decide to buy their own cots and bring them in. So they sleep there. And then there's the Golden Isles 2 well facility up off the spur across the interstate, where we have basically overflow sleeping if we don't have enough space for everybody.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Now, while they're sleeping, are they being paid?
No.
So they work a shift and that's it, and when they
12 hours.
they go off? Okay.
Yes, sir.
But
Because
they're
they
not-
won't,
they're
FEMA
not
won't
for-
reimburse you for 24 hours worth of
Well,
work.
well, we have tried that in the past, I know. Put people on call, they on call, so they call 24 hours a day. You know, even though while they're sleeping, they're still on call. So that's,
That has been done in the past, and my understanding from previous storms is we did not get reimbursed for all of that happening. And plus, you want to make sure with the 12 on, 12 off shift that everybody understands that when you hit your 12 hours, it's time to stop. Not because we don't want to pay you, but because for your own safety, you need to get a rest. Once
Right.
you've been working for 16 or 18 hours, you're just a safety risk at that point to yourself
okay.
And others.
and others.
And
Absolutely.
I think statistics show after 10,
Right. So,
your efficiency ratings go way down after 10 hours.
I mean, yeah, we all like to think we can just drink coffee and Red Bull and stay up for 5 days, but it doesn't work like that.
Okay.
Are we only housing team members, or does our policy allow for people to bring their families with them and stuff like that? I mean, everybody has to make prior arrangements You gotta get your family out.
Which is why you're on this list now.
Right.
Everybody here understands that they are committing to send their families off. We can't make this decision the day, or 2 or 3 days out. We make this decision in May.
Right.
That way people can make plans. And it's also important to note that during, so much of this was academic. Nobody in this room had experienced this to the degree we did for her going into Hurricane Matthew. Bear in mind that if you were Tier 1, you were on this list. If you were Tier 2, we said, well, go off to wherever you're headed to, Macon, and then we'll call you when we need you. And then Tier 3 were those that had stated they had family situations or pet situations that required for them to head for the hills. During Hurricane Matthew, when we now know if you weren't on this list and we needed you, there was no way we were going to see you until 3 days following reentry because of the guards at the gate. You couldn't cross a bridge for lack of DOT inspection. You couldn't get into Glynn County even with a reentry pass, even if you were the sheriff. Even our sheriff had trouble getting past the state patrol. So you start adding all that together. We go into hurricane season counting on worst case scenario, and then as it states at the beginning, maximum availability, actual roster will be dependent upon need. We didn't even get contacted for Hurricane Michael to send customer service reps over because Glynn County didn't expect that big of a deal. We didn't stage anybody for Winter Storm Grayson, and I was stuck on the phone nonstop for days because people were wondering why we didn't have water and sewer because we weren't prepared for the level of power outage caused by a winter storm. So when we talk about all hazards incident response, everybody on this roster is then trained and committed to face the possibility that they're going to be engaged regardless of the circumstance. So we do want them to be prepared for that. But it is worst case scenario as far as 85.
And we certainly we prioritize those people, that have skills that are useful in those scenarios, but also those folks that have worked in multiple divisions that can be used in multiple roles. We have several people that have worked both water and sewer. We want those people here during the event so that they can wear different hats. Because you may think that you're going into an event where you're going to deal with sewer problems because of power outages, and then you have oak trees uproot and you've got multiple main breaks that have to be fixed all of a sudden on the water side. So we try to get some people that have some flexibility in their work skills.
Yes. FEMA defends, and as this being time-tested, it was actually more or less invented by the U.S. Forest Service. And lessons learned from decades of experience in emergency management taught that this type of incident is different than a combat experience. A combat experience, you have 7 support personnel for every person on the front lines. And everybody you encounter in a bar says they were special forces, but the reality is they were probably a cook. We have to have people provide the support for those that are out slinging the shovels. So though it does look heavy on the finance administration, planning and logistics end, if we don't do that, we're going to have folks, honestly, and I'm cutting into what you might say, but part of the lesson that we learned from Matthew is that we had staff that were out working 18 hours or longer at a stretch without eating. And then once we were stood down, I was carrying meals to folks at 2 in the morning that hadn't eaten in 2 or 3 days.
What they got to do with admin staff, man?
The incident command structure is those 4 sections. It's not finance administration. It's logistics provides the cots, the sleeping bags, the support for those that are working in operations. Finance provides the funding. Finance does the documentation. You don't expect anybody in operations to do the function of finance administration, logistics, or planning. So they're responsible for just going and doing, and the other staff support those that are going and doing. Even in our experience, that was not academic. That was actually real world powerful. Even now, and as far as the perception of what type of staff engages in the Emergency Operations Center, we haven't had to have the customer service representatives there. We've just been asked to do that. So I don't have any experience on knowing whether having 2 people in rotation to answer calls is overstrength or not. But everything else has been tried and tested. In fact, we were short on logistics. We at times couldn't keep up with the demand, so we were getting meals from Glynn County. An army moves on its stomach. You can't count on people to serve themselves meals. So we were, and you know, this isn't something we invented. We're obviously, as I stated, following FEMA standards. So it's an appropriate amount of strength for those 4 sections.
We'll certainly take a hard look at those functions before we ever were to stand up to verify that we are adequately staffed and not overstaffed in that regard.
What do we do about food?
Okay.
That's,
For food, what we do typically, we have some,
I mean, I know the people at the
Yeah.
command center, obviously they're probably dependent on the county, but the people at Academy Creek,
the people at Academy Creek, if there were some spontaneous event, we do have a few cases of MREs available, but ideally, we try to avoid eating those because MREs are not good. So,
Pretty good.
Depends on how ugly.
depends on how hungry you are, I guess. But typically, if we were in an event situation, a couple of days beforehand, the logistics folks will go purchase supplies to cook
Okay.
during the event. We get a lot of instant mashed potatoes and fried chicken, pre-made fried chicken that can be heated up and stuff like that. And that's what a lot of sandwiches and things of that nature that can be sort of mass produced. And then the logistics folks during work hours, they prep everything so when somebody comes in and there's pre-made meals, bagged meals for them to go and eat lunch, so we don't have to stand in line at that point so they can actually get a break. So, and then we were fortunate to have some local community partners that came through and provided some meals for us as well.
I don't know that we can depend on them though.
We can't
Whenever-
depend on them, absolutely, but,
If we ever had a, just a
and we also,
catastrophic event, they wouldn't be.
and there's a few of us that enjoy the fried Spam for breakfast.
Okay.
So when are we planning to have a policy together on salary team members and general pay scale for during an emergency? I mean, it sounds like we have to have a written policy in order for FEMA to reimburse us. What's kind of our plan to have that?
We have a policy now that we could use. It probably needs some fleshing out. We have a HR committee meeting next week that we could have that on. I would request that we not have to meet the tomorrow afternoon deadline to get you a read-ahead on that for next Thursday's meeting, but if we could potentially get that to you first of next week to look over, we could have that on next week's agenda.
If you don't mind, distribute it out to this committee.
Certainly, yeah, absolutely will. Absolutely will.
Does anybody else have anything on the staff training? I have a feeling kind of all five of these are going to run together
They
to
are.
some extent because they're all kind of overlapping. But does anybody else have anything on staff training or readiness for or anything? Very well done, thank you all. What about, let's move on to lessons learned from past storms.
Okay, when we think about storms, the ones that always come to mind are Matthew and Irma, just because of the scale that it took on this community. But in reality, in the past few years, we've went through 5 named events, beginning with Tropical Storm Hermine right there before Matthew. That we kind of talked as a staff, and that sort of proved to everybody that we can be hit by these things. For years, we were never affected by anything. Now, that's my understanding to talk to the people.
I can't tell you how many times I've said, we're immune.
Yeah, so to Commissioner Neal's point, that proved we were not immune and that we probably needed to engage in some of these planning activities that maybe before seemed completely academic. Now it's not academic. During Hurricane Matthew, you saw widespread water outages and, of course, power outages. And then, as Mr. Sellers pointed out before, the reentry situation where we could not get those Tier 2 staff back into the county became something that we took notice of. And also, as we spoke about before, the first boil water advisory this utility ever put out was following Hurricane Matthew, following advice from EPD due to the amount of main breaks that we had. So that is a issue that we see commonly now, but prior to that, we had never put one of those out. During Irma and Matthew, we had significant electrical problems due to brownouts with power coming on and surging and going back off. And so we had 6-figure pump replacement cost in both of those storms because of that. Hurricane Irma, we had widespread sewer problems. Matthew had all the water problems. Irma had all the sewer problems, and that caused a major reduction in the available support services for the county. During Hurricane Michael, like we said, we figured out how we could, right-size the team for the event, but we also learned through working with Georgia's Web EOC program that we need to be able to provide aid to other communities when they have major problems. We provided generator support for Bainbridge, Georgia, because of the devastation that hit them over there. It's not always your community that gets hit. Emergency management is something that helps everybody in the state out.
How does, I'm sorry, how does that work from a reimbursement perspective? If we loan stuff to Bainbridge, are we able to go to FEMA and ask for reimbursement support?
If it is asked for through the WebEOC protocol, correct?
Correct.
You know, if Bainbridge picks up the phone and calls me and they haven't put it in through WebEOC and we just say, yeah, then we're probably gonna eat that cost. But if they go through the requisition process through Georgia EMA, then it is FEMA reimbursable at that point.
How are we for, our generators?
I was gonna ask.
Are we up to speed with that?
Well, we have 5 portable generators that we own. We have 5 portable generators that we lease. So that gives us 10. That's mostly for use on the sewer side. We have permanent generators at enough water stations that we should be able to supply water in an extended event.
Okay.
There are some stations that have generator problems, but because of the way our water system functions, one well being down doesn't necessarily cause us tremendous issues because we feed from multiple areas.
Okay.
What I was gonna ask, Andrew, was, you know, you had mentioned when you started that the brownouts and power surges cause pump damage in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Do we have generators at those places to protect those pumps?
We do not have permanent generators at many stations at all. We prefer to have portable generators because having a generator sitting somewhere permanently that's got 3 feet of water on top of it, the generator doesn't particularly help that situation out. So having 10 portable generators, we try to put those in the locations that are the biggest impact, based off also how Georgia Power's getting the system back on.
And we can get them there prior to an event so that we can have them hooked up so that these pumps don't go through these.
Right, well, there's
Surges.
multiple ways we can handle that with these surges. One of the things that we've talked about many times in the past is de-energizing the system prior to the weather coming through so that we don't have the surges during the event. And as Georgia Power gets their system back online and we coordinate with them, then we bring our system back up and you don't have that problem with
And
power
we've got
surges.
protocol.
We do, and that was one thing we were going to discuss later today, is that something that we have been working heavily on because it did cause us such problems in the past.
Okay.
But not only generators, we also have 6 portable bypass pumps, diesel-driven bypass pumps that we can pull behind and set up at stations and bypass around the station if it doesn't have power. And then we have 10 permanent bypass pumps at stations, so that's 26 items that can help in those events. And when I say there's permanent bypass pumps, they can be moved if they're absolutely necessary. They're not convenient to move, but they can be moved with the right equipment, and we have the
What
equipment.
about the hospital? What we gonna do about the hospital?
Well, we currently have plans for 4 facilities to maintain water service during any event due to the needs. The hospital is one of those. The jail, because the jail it's difficult to evacuate there. Brunswick High, where we stage all the first responders at for the city and the county, and also out to the EOC. So those 4 facilities, we have plans in place that we will not shut off water service to them during the storm so that they can be supplied during that event. Now, the sewer technically will be shut off, but if no one else is using the system, we have storage space in the lines to hang on for 12 hours before we can bring it back up, unless they use a whole lot more water than what they should in a 12-hour period.
They poop a lot, huh?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So we have those 4 taken care of. Now, one thing you'll notice on there is one of the places that we did not state we had water service to was Academy Creek. We have water trucks that we can use to maintain water to the toilets and things of that, so we can flush, and we'll have bottled water for our guys to drink. There's no efficient way to provide water to Academy Creek in an event because the lack of available wells right there beside it. So
I understand.
we have plenty of water to operate the plant. There is some water required in wastewater treatment, but we have reuse water on the plant that handles that. But as far as the staff, we have plans in place there to stay off of our system and be able to maintain.
Okay.
And then as Mr. Sellers brought up earlier, we never talk about this, especially in public, that Winter Storm Grayson was a big deal. We talk about planning for hurricanes all the time and floods all the time, but we got if we're being honest, a very minor ice storm through here compared to what a lot of the country deals with. and it caused us tremendous power outages. It was a much more significant event than what you think, you know. It was not just, hey, we're going to close the office for the day, everything's going to melt, we're going to go back the next day. We had staff out for 2 or 3 days tracking down all the power outages that came from that. So those are some of the lessons learned. A lot of it, as you see, did revolve around power problems. Because in our industry, that's usually what we deal with. If we have a significant storm surge, then it becomes a completely different animal. But most of the time, if the water's not 3 feet deep, the power becomes the biggest situation.
I was going to ask a little later on, but since we kind of got on that subject matter, at one point we were doing a grant for some generators.
That's correct.
For a grant. What's the status of that grant?
Okay, we have got applications in for 2 grants. Both of them have been approved through GEMA, and they are at the FEMA stage of the approval process right now. We are applying, and we understand the likelihood of this happening is slim, but we are applying to have automatic transfer switches and quick connects at every lift station so that we can take a portable generator and have the quick connect pigtails where we pump it down, disconnect it, go to the next station. The likelihood of getting 160 of those is pretty slim, but we ask for 160 and then we'll parse it down when they tell us how many they'll give us, and we'll prioritize them at that point. The other grant that we've asked for are for 10 generators. 7 of those will be permanent installations and 3 additional portable generators. 3 of those generators will be for the Academy Creek plant itself, and the other 4 permanent generators will be for water stations to replace aged generators at the water stations, and 3 more portables. So both of those are moving through the process. We've recently supplied FEMA with more information on the transfer switch cost estimates and how we came up with those. We actually got that to them this week. So hopefully that is moving along. We haven't heard anything on the generator request in a couple of months, which is probably good because that means they haven't asked for more information on it yet.
And when do we expect to hear something? I mean, just tentatively. I know you can't say what the federal government.
Yeah, exactly. Just depending on the federal government, I hope we would know something before the end of the year, but that's just a pure pulling a number out of the air.
So we don't count those.
Those are not included in our list of available supplies. Now, if we're able to get those, then certainly that will make us even more prepared for these events.
Sure.
What about the general, I mean, you talked about lessons learned. How are we doing with coordinating with Georgia Power, kind of a systematic, countywide, citywide recovery plan so that their efforts are working on, so that we're
Right.
not working on a pump station over here, that they're gonna have power to this one. It's gonna be 2 days over here and this is the one we're working on. How are we working on that?
As we know, Georgia Power not only has their crews out in the field, they have a large number of other contractors that are coming in that event. So they have quite the coordination effort on their hands and what's being worked on. We have met with Georgia Power's local group here, provided them our GIS layers for our assets, and provided them a priority list of what we need power to first. Now, they were not going to guarantee that we were the number 1 priority they had. I mean, naturally, the hospital's going to be a higher priority than we are because, we have people's lives at stake at that point. So, but we are in their rotation because one of the things we pointed out is typically the way the power company does things is they go after areas of high population because that impacts the most of their customers. We have some lift stations that take a lot of that flow from those high-density areas that aren't in high-density areas because people don't want large pump stations right beside high-density areas in a lot of situations. And so in these events, they would get these neighborhoods with power, and we couldn't pump from them because the downstream stations weren't up yet. So having that list, they're committing to trying their best to work on that in our priority order because like they agreed at that point that they're telling everybody the power's back on, but then we're saying, hey, we don't have sewer access, then there's conflicting information that's getting out to the community. So we are working through that with them now. With the GIS folks are doing whatever voodoo they do to make that happen.
Okay.
Anybody got anything else on discussion item 2? All right, moving along to 3, current hurricane season preparedness level. Andrew and Jay.
Yes, sir. So we're talking today mostly about the hurricane plan that we have in order here. One of the things we've talked about for the last 2 years and we have not followed is de-energizing our system prior to an event. It is standard practice in our industry that prior to a major event that the system be de-energized to eliminate limit the problems after the event takes place. We have, in our plan, at 12 hours from landfall, we will begin making preparations to shut the system down. And when I say begin making preparations, we have a plan in place to shut the system down if necessary. But at the 12-hour mark, we're going to bring the crews in and make sure everyone understands the order you have to shut the system down in, because we certainly don't want to cause even bigger problems by shutting the system down in the wrong order. So the sewer system will be pumped down from the edges in so that there is as much available capacity as possible in the event of a storm hitting. And the shutdown procedures will begin 9 hours prior to landfall of the event. And the reason we picked 9 hours is we estimate it will take at least 6 hours to shut our entire sewer system down. And therefore, if you run into problems, you have roughly 2 hours of, for lack of a better term, play in there if something were to happen. And then that last hour, it's get back to the office before something major happens. We don't want our crews out driving when you have a hurricane or a tropical storm hit landfall. We had people that in the last event were trying their best to protect our assets when there were other first responders in the community that basically said, we can't be out there. When the police and the fire and the EMTs won't go out and get you, we don't need to be out there either, because if something were to happen, we can't get help. So that's why the 9 hour mark. And then roughly 3 hours after the event passes, we would start bringing the system back up. So if you think of that, you're talking about a 12-hour window where we would have the system down. And this would only occur if we had a named event that had sustained tropical storm force winds. Every time it rains, we're not going to shut the system down, but if we're going to have sustained tropical storm force winds as predicted by the National Weather Service, and there's a named event, we would try to implement this starting 12 hours in advance. The water system will be shut down as well. It's a little easier to shut the water system down than it is the sewer system, because you don't have to pump everything down. It's fine for the water to stay in the pipes because, you're not having to have excess capacity at that point.
So with the towers still?
The towers will have water in them in the event that we did have major damage to a station or something. We could maintain pressure after the event. So the towers will be full.
But during the event, will the towers still be pressurizing the system, or you're closing a valve and isolating the system?
The system will be isolated
So
at
you're
that
not
point.
just cutting pumps off, you're closing the valve.
We're isolating the system.
Maintaining water in the tower.
Right, maintaining water in the towers. And then afterwards, you go open it up to help pressurize the system while you're getting everything else brought online.
I guess my confusion and concern about the 12 hours out, 9 hours out is 9 hours out from what? I mean, is that
From predicted landfall.
landfall, actual center of the storm, or actual first landfall of predicted tropical storm force winds? So those are
Land,
totally
not,
It's the potential for sustained tropical storm force
not
winds.
gust,
doesn't-
but
yeah,
once the predicted winds arrive for sustained winds, that's 12 hours from that point.
Correct, because the eye is a happy place.
Yeah.
But everything before and after that is the danger zone. So if we can't have our staff out there maintaining the systems, we'd rather have control over their being re-energized.
Well, what other locations I've seen struggled with is, the predictions are so widely ranging on what that is. So if it's we're predicting 100-mile-an-hour winds, and they're saying that landfall is at noon. Well, the 40-mile-an-hour winds get there 6 a.m.
Right.
Or whatever. I'm making up numbers, obviously.
Right.
So that's why I was curious what we were actually benchmarking against. What are we?
Well, we would go through, at the EOC, they get regular briefings from the National Hurricane Center, and we'll be using the best information we have available from them. And Jay and the folks at the EOC keep us up to date with that. And then in the event of those updates prior to the storm, myself or someone else in the incident command role would be present there to get that information firsthand.
And the incident commander is the one, while we have a written policy, the incident commander is the one making the final call, right?
That's correct.
So whoever the incident commander is the one saying, okay, my understanding of 12 hours is
Right.
noon's the time.
That's correct.
Anything else?
I think, well, we got a few other items here. We've talked about having some vendor contracts in place. We have 2 existing contracts with fuel providers so that we can have diesel during the event. Naturally, they're not going to bring it while the storm is going on, so we have a fuel cube available that holds some fuel to get us through the immediate needs after the storm. Is also the wastewater plant generators have belly tanks on them, so they have enough. They'll be fueled up prior to the event.
Yes, sir.
In an earlier storm, we had a problem in which I believe, if I recall correctly, the contract said the vendor was gonna be there, but he wasn't there, and we had a hard time getting fuel. Has that been corrected?
Well, I'll say that has been corrected from the standpoint of we have multiple contracts now, so we have multiple ways to get fuel instead of relying on a single vendor. Ocean Petroleum, we don't directly have a contract with them to provide fuel. They're our normal fuel service provider. They have contracts with many other companies to help bring fuel from other areas. So we have, we've diversified our risk in that regard.
Make sure we have fuel.
Right.
And the fuel cells that you're talking about where we can store fuel,
We can store fuel, yes, sir.
does that comply with EPA, EPD guidelines?
They are
that,
double walled and everything like that. They meet all the requirements.
Meet all the requirements so that we won't solve one problem while creating another.
Correct. And if you look at the roster, some of the folks on there, like the construction crews, there may not necessarily need to be pipe being laid at the time, but those folks are the ones that are going around fueling everything up at that time as well. So that fuel cube goes on the back of the truck and goes and fuels up all the generators and stuff out in the system. Vehicles are a little easier to take care of.
Do we have our own fueling station for vehicles and
We do
equipment
not.
and stuff like that? We depend on a retail establishment
Right.
somewhere.
That's correct.
So we're filling all those up 2 days in
Yes,
advance. 3 days in
every
advance.
vehicle that we could possibly use during an event will have a complete full tank prior to the event hitting.
Including Tricos and
Yes,
Bobcats.
absolutely. That's a standard procedure, 24 hours before anything happens, you go fuel everything up. And we'll spend that whole day prior to the event making sure everything's fueled up.
What about reentry passes for vendors and people that are external sources that we depend on that aren't directly with us? What do
We
do to
have
make
a
sure that-
list of all of our vendors right now. Unfortunately, that is quite the extensive list, and as we do not want to be the cause of everybody getting back in the county prior to the county wanting them to be back in because they happen to do business with us. So what we have committed to yesterday was by the end of next week, we will have that list parsed down to a critical vendor list. And then that next week, they will be sent vendor passes for reentry in the event that we need them. You know, when I say not everybody's critical, I mean, we buy a lot of things. We don't necessarily need to have somebody that can do machine shop work during an event. That, you know, the likelihood of them being able to have the supplies ready in time is pretty slim. Somebody that can do electrical work and help us out in the event, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of reentry pass to help us back at that point.
And have they worked out the reentry pass so that it would get past the bridge guards and the?
My understanding
county
is they
line
have
guards?
solved that protocol.
Yes, sir. You would have received an email from me, I believe in May or early June, that included the family readiness guide as well as that reentry pass. So whereas prior to Hurricane Matthew, the understanding was that merely providing our staff directory to Glynn County EMA would basically grease the entryway. That wasn't the case, and at this point, we do expect everyone to have at least a digital copy of that. If you have it on your phone, that's all it takes for the State Patrol to let you back in.
Do you mind redistributing that?
Yeah.
Not a problem at all.
Yeah, I can't remember the
understand.
email I got from you yesterday, so
And-
I'm surely not remembering May.
And it doesn't make a difference to us whether you use that which the city and county provided, or you use the one that we provide. It's still gonna be,
It's gonna be good to
And
go.
it's
Good
no
to go.
longer the green
no, sir.
mirror tank, it's a piece of paper that's.
Correct. It has a specific code to our, to the JWSC.
Right. So that should be straightened out. Again, a lot of this for not only us, but other parts of our community. We hadn't really dealt with this before, so we were kind of figuring out along the way that we've solved a lot of these issues that seemed basic at the time, but create quite the hassle. Now,
And, excuse me one more time, Andrew, but Jay, did you make a note to resend those?
Yes, sir. That's not,
She's doing it, she's doing it.
So-
Take care.
this, for instance, is that pass.
Okay.
And even in the GMA documentation, they use the visual of somebody showing it on their phone. So you don't have to have a paper copy. As long as you can access it and you have it in a saved folder, emergency planning or something on your phone, you'll be good to go.
I'd have to call you to tell me where to find it on my phone, so.
It's a little off
Just
subject.
resend it. Andrew, if you see it on your phone, that means it went on through, because I copied you and Jay also just now.
well, my phone just went off, so I'm assuming that's it.
Cool. Thank you very
It's
much.
a little off subject and not specific only to joint water sewer, but it does affect us as well. But my concern with those paper passes is that, you know, they'll get to a point where they'll deny them because they feel like they've been passed out like candy. I mean, what's to stop
me from taking the one you give me and making 500 copies for everybody in my neighborhood.
I'm the company, well, no, not at all. I'm the company contact. It's listed on there as point of contact, and they're going to reach out to me if there's a question.
Okay.
So myself or Joey will be in the Emergency Operations Center responding, saying
And
yes.
they'll have a list of those companies that we have provided those passes to.
Okay, well, that's good. Help
So we've
clarify
worked through
some
some of that. And that sort of leads us into the discussion of mutual aid agreements. You know, those are things that we don't have formal mutual aid agreements with any other agencies right now. We're trying to acquire some of those and make sure we have those documented. But like we talked about before, with the Web EOC program, you can put in a resource request for other areas of the state. We are versed in both putting in requests as well as filling those requests if necessary. In fact, during Hurricane Irma, we received additional generator support from Georgia Rural Water, and we actually received some support from Alabama Rural Water. So everybody in the southeast was able to see those Web EOC requests and provide supplies if necessary in that event. So no official mutual aid agreements at this point, but we do use the Web EOC function. And then one that, as far as current preparedness, that we don't think about sometimes as much as we have been doing a great deal of public education around hurricane preparedness for our citizens and our community. We've worked closely with Glynn County EMA on how to do that. They've taken part in some videos that we've made with both what goes in your
Go bag
your go
and
bag, your ready bag,
shelter kit.
what goes in your shelter kit, and things of that nature, so that we can help our customers be more prepared. We have the GIS outage dashboard. If you were here for the last couple of events, you may have been aware of that. There's a simple green-red scenario on there. Of green means it's pumping and red means it's not. So you know whether, if you go to the Glynn County GIS page, you can see where the stations are up and where they're not up at that point. We also are working to, we're going to be working hard after the event of making sure our staff documents the damages through photographs to make sure we can provide that information to FEMA for the reimbursement purposes.
Have we got any videos that explains to the community what we're gonna do?
Yes, sir. My favorite is if our power is out, if your power is out, our power may be out too, pushing the message that even if we do have a generator, there may be limited fuel. If we have no generator there and you hit your light switch and nothing comes on, be careful, don't flush. Limited service availability during storms like that. September is National Preparedness Month, so even though we pushed out that content prior to hurricane season, we're going to develop some new content and then recycle some of that during the month of September. Since the peak of hurricane season will be upon us, and it'll be perhaps more interesting times.
Okay, well, I guess my question is, do we have a video on our plan?
As far as the shutdown plan, no, sir, we do not have one.
No, sir. No, sir.
But
About showing the community how much effort we put into our planning.
Okay.
And it's a priority thing that you all have to figure out, because you know what the priority is, but I think it would be good that if we could have it available in our,
Yes, sir.
that's certainly something we can get in the queue of things to knock out.
We have that. We have one regarding our role in emergency response, and then one, how do we communicate in an emergency? So once again, pushing that out in May prior to hurricane season and recycling that.
yeah.
So
It's
you'll have an
just-
opportunity to see it again.
It's just to make sure that they have confidence that we're gonna take care of it.
Certainly, yes, sir.
No, on this GMO reentry pass, it's got, point of contact, as you mentioned, and it's got I assume that's your landline.
Yes, sir.
Somebody,
My cell is also secondary. It doesn't show that on here, but GMA,
okay, they do have that.
They do
Well,
have that, yes,
my question, if you're out at the command center and they're calling you saying, hey, we got Andrew Burrows at the county line, says he knows you, and you're out there at the county, how are they going to?
they know how to get in touch with me. During Hurricane Michael, for instance, I'm sitting on the couch minding my own business on Sunday morning, and I get a phone call from GMA Director Homer Bryson saying that they needed much help with generators in Southwest Georgia. So I know they can reach out and touch me any time of day. Yes, sir. Standing by.
And I guess as far as current season preparedness level, you can kind of sum it up into basically two questions. Is our system more resilient than it was before? We have made improvements to our system to make it more resilient, but we are in no shape in a perfect resilient scenario, but we're slowly making progress on that. As far as our staff resiliency, having been through these events makes us better prepared to handle them after the fact now, but also focusing on getting the training necessary to go through these events has been a big help. And I want to thank Mr. Sellers for spearheading that for us, because, you know, if you've never worked in an incident command structure, things are much more regimented that way than they are in other areas. So making sure that you understand the protocols can be a big help, so.
Thank you very much.
Anybody got anything else on number 3? Moving along to discussion item 4, immediate needs and priorities, Andrew.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about 3 things as far as immediate needs and priorities. One of these we've touched on already today, and that's backup pumping and/or power capacity. We've talked about the GMA grant that we're going for, our FEMA grant going forward to get those supplies. But we also, a couple of months back, when we presented our proposed SPLOST 2020 list, one of the things on there was additional pumping capacity, portable pumping capacity for these stations. So that's something that we believe is critical, because, you know, eventually we're going to get to a situation where we're going to have all these assets out and there's still going to be people without.
Excuse me, you provide this list to Glynn County already?
It was provided to this
To this?
Right. Commission so far, yes, sir. That we have provided some of our information to Glynn County. Glynn County's still working on their list at this point as far as what's going on. And we are working with Glynn County to make sure that if they're doing storm drainage work in a particular area that's being funded by SPLOST and they're going to be digging around our assets, we would like to be included in that project so that we're not forking out money out of our reserves for their SPLOST projects.
Sure.
So that information will certainly be provided to them once they get their list done. So a couple of situations there where we're looking at now. The other thing, and this is something that I think we can take a major step forward in now, is our SCADA system. Currently, we are running 2 different SCADA systems. We are running a data flow systems product, DFS, you may have heard about in the past, which is a radio-based product that sends 2 repeaters and things from water towers and other locales, and then sends that information back to the plant. We also have a VT SCADA system which uses cellular radios that provide access. The main difference between these 2 systems is the VT SCADA system, each station is responsible for itself. There is no repeaters or anything that can cause a point of failure. We have, especially in the downtown areas where you have more density and therefore more pump stations, we could have a one asset go down on a water tower, not the water tower itself going down, but one of the repeaters on a water tower go down, and we could not see 40 stations at once. And that's problematic. And so when we talk about SCADA, SCADA can do 2 things. You can control things through SCADA, but that requires another level of investment to make sure we have all that information. But in these events, monitoring what's going on is more important than controlling what's going on. If we know what's going on out there from what we can see, we can take care of controlling it. But when you've got 160 stations that are blind, basically, the only thing you can do is drive to 160 stations to see what's going on. So we would love to be able to move forward with additional VT SCADA resources on the stations that don't have it. We currently have about 8 stations on VT SCADA. Some of that with some recent project work. The projects that are going on now at lift stations, they're all being converted to VT SCADA while we're doing this. But that would be a major help for us to move forward with that. And also, we have redundant servers for VT SCADA. We have 3 servers, one located at each, actually we have 4. One located at each plant site, plus a additional server for backup, so that system should not go down in a storm event. And since if one was to go down because of a tree falling on or something, the only thing that's going down as far as SCADA is that one station and not 40 of them at once. So you may see a request come through to fund a capital project to take a chunk out of the SCADA needs, just because of how much that would help out in these events.
What's the ROM on that?
If we were going to do all 155 or so stations that needed to be converted to VT SCADA, you're probably looking at $2 million.
SPOS thing we're thinking, or are you trying to get that out?
We may try to get that out of R&R just because we can get moving quicker on it. Now, we can talk about that later as far as how many of those we want to do at one time, but that would be probably what it would take to do all of them.
Well, if you prioritize them,
If we-
do it by basin?
No, sir. We would prioritize them based off of flow through the station. If you're going to have one you can't see, you'd rather it be the one that has 15 customers on it instead of 1,500 customers on it. Just out of necessity at that point. And the other thing we have, and we are working through some plans on this now, we have a continuity of operations plan that Stephen Patton in our IT group has worked hard on so that we have redundant server space down at Academy Creek for the servers in this building, which helps us with email, customer service, everything like that. In the event this building was destroyed, we don't lose all of that information. So we're currently looking at a plan to convert part of the upstairs at Academy Creek into a redundant server room where we can come in before an event, pull the servers out of the rack, and already have another setup down there we can slide that into. So that'll be a big help to us in that event as well. So that has not been completed yet, but that is something we are working through. Those are the three major things that we have from an immediate needs. And again, backup power and pumping being something that's a longer-term issue just because of the sheer cost of if we were going to put that at every station, which is not practical to do that. VT SCADA or getting off of the single point of failure from multiple stations set up would be very helpful for us, and then getting the continuity of operations plan fleshed out down there at Academy Creek.
Who leads the effort and makes the decisions or recommendations on insurance levels we carry?
We have a group here that sits down with our insurance broker, and we talk through that.
Who's our broker?
Mr. McGinty.
Okay.
And so we do present that to the commission for approval prior to renewal. This year, as far as our property, we did not see an increase in our rate, but we did increase our values, asset values. So it ended up being an increase in the same.
When does that
regard.
renew?
I believe that renews in November or December, somewhere around there. Is that about right, Janice?
That'd probably be a good topic for finance at some point. Or
Right.
something.
What's the?
Do some creative things with insurance and,
All right. Anything else from an immediate needs that y'all see as an immediate need that I haven't brought up? I mean, I'm always open for suggestions in that regard. All right.
anything else discussion-wise on it? All right, moving along to discussion 5, long-term hurricane planning.
So, long-term planning, basically in a nutshell, what are we doing or how are we going to get to the point where we don't have extended outages in an event? Increasing the available generator and bypassing capacity certainly would make a tremendous impact on that. Working through, and hopefully we never have to do it again, but working through each storm with Georgia Power to refine the way they're going and getting power back up and how it relates to our system will help. And I think what we've got so far is a good start with them. But as we know, in an event, things are going to go a little different than what it looks like on paper.
So let me ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we're kind of in a fiefdom area where Georgia Power has their fiefdom and worries about what they're gonna do. We have what we're gonna do. But it would appear to me that the county should have an overall participation in what we're doing and what Georgia Power is doing, so that it's a united plan for the whole county to recover, to respond to, and to recover to a storm event.
Yeah. And I think part of that goes through the EOC.
It does.
And there's major coordination there
Right.
already.
There is.
And as Andrew was saying, through past events, we've learned where the weak points were, and I think they've worked on that. I went to one tabletop,
Well, and to
and
that
of course, I was like a deer in the headlights out there during most of that.
To that point, those tabletop exercises are very effective when we get all the members of the agencies in the county that need to be there together. If you've not sat in on one of those tabletops where we're talking to people at the county and the city and the hospital and Georgia Power and all these other DOT in there, you don't really understand sometimes what everyone else is going through in these events, because you're very myopic at times, especially when you have a lot of things going on. So those are very effective. I thought we had a very good one this spring.
And I might add, in their defense, Georgia Power gives us top-notch customer service. It feels like we're beating them up a little bit, but the fact remains, we're 10 feet from them in the Emergency Operations Center, and they're communicating with their staff and their contractors on our priorities. And there's a lot of moving parts, and they're doing the best they can. There's dependency upon clearing roads. That was easier during Matthew than Irma because we had the reentry delayed. Georgia Power does a great job of engaging with us and determining what priorities are. So be that as it may.
Well, and to that point, that is correct, but in prior storms, we did not have our full priority list provided to them prior to the event. It was
It
more,
was a short list, the plants.
yeah, I need the plants back on, and then we'll figure out the lift stations as they come along. We've now prioritized everything for them.
Okay, so we've matured a whole lot.
We have absolutely matured in our response, and we talked about tabletop exercises. We did the countywide tabletop exercise earlier this spring. We internally are going to do a tabletop exercise prior to September 1st. We haven't got it officially scheduled yet. And while we may not go through official scenarios of we're going to have 3 feet of water here or whatever, make sure that everybody is fully understanding of what their responsibility is in certain parts of the storm and how they're going to interact together so that we're not duplicating efforts. One, at that point, we may find out, like you said, Mayor, that maybe some functions can be combined so that we can reduce staffing and things of that nature. So that will be occurring this month in August here, and we'll most likely have that in this room. So whenever we get that formalized, we'll send the invite out, and y'all are more than welcome to attend or participate if you would like to.
I got a question. You said long-term hurricane planning, and one of them is to make sure our lift stations are, our pump stations are, I guess, actively efficient during the hurricane, during the storm or whatever like that. Is there any things to talk about, maybe trying to eliminate some of our pump stations? So what you call don't have to worry about, we don't have to worry about it failing, whatever, it just pass through?
We have talked there are some pump stations that could potentially be eliminated that would require large diameter, very deep gravity sewers, and it's very expensive to do that. There are some areas where that can happen. Unfortunately, with the lack of elevation in the county, there's just some spots, there's no options but to pump. You can pump as much gravity sewer in there and it's just not gonna do anything,
Not
so.
gonna flow, it's gonna stay here. Okay.
So, we look for options to eliminate as much as possible on the pump station regard, because if you've got 160 pump stations, it's kind of like having 160 children. One of them is always screaming at you.
Always.
So the more we can get rid of, the happier everyone's going to be, so.
He's got one.
I've got one and she screams enough.
Anything else in long-term plan?
That's all I've got for y'all today, unless y'all have any more questions.
Have we done any kind of risk assessment? I know we've talked about this a little bit behind the scenes, but, you know, to me, in my mind at least, you know, wind and, you know, doesn't pose that huge a threat to us. It knocks some trees over, that kind of stuff. It knocks power out. You know, a pump station here and there, I mean, those are minimal. You can just pick up the phone, call, and
Right.
get a pump in a couple of days. I mean, have we done some kind of risk analysis to see what a big storm surge would do to our above-ground assets at Academy Creek and at, over on the island and such? And if we had a major issue or major failure,
Yes, sir.
what would be our recovery time to get service back to the community?
From a mapping sense, Haggerty Consulting a few years back did a vulnerability assessment for us to determine how we might be impacted by a significant storm surge. And if we did have groundwater, floodwater, rainwater, high tide, worst case scenario, inundation, the areas it would be impacted. And that in partnership with the Glynn County, City of Brunswick assessment that was done. The title of that document is escaping me right now, but the Glynn County was reviewed, and then we asked specifically for our assets on the GIS map, where would the storm surge hit those assets, and then we were able to identify them most correctly.
Well, if you've been out to Academy Creek, everything except for the raw sewage pumps are 4 feet tall at a minimum. Everything's at least chest high out there. So if we were to get it, now at Dunbar, they're also, other than raw sewage is elevated, the blowers there are not, so that would be a potential issue there. But if we were to get a storm surge event where we had enough water that everything at Academy Creek would be submerged, I don't think that the water and sewer service is going to be the biggest issue at that point.
I guess what I'm getting at is, I mean, what is our, and maybe this is just, no, they're concrete, they're fine, but, you know, I mean, I'm not talking about, you
Right.
know, them flooding, but I mean, if you get water all around it and it undermined and took out some of those concrete tanks,
Well,
and, you know, cracked the walls on it, and now you no longer have a concrete containment, I mean, is that 3 months to fix? Is that 3 days to fix? I mean, a pump you can get, you know, even if you have to get it from California, you can put it on a plane and get it here in a couple days.
what I'll say, as far as the concrete basins, in a wastewater facility, you have redundant everything. Now, in a major storm event, we need all those basins, sure. If we're running 30 million gallons through the plant, we're gonna need all those basins. But if we had a breach, say, of a tank where the tank drained out at that point, we would be working closely with EPD on what to do about that. But they do have protocols in place for, it's called upset events in that scenario. Once the storm subsided, we would not need all the basins any longer to be running, so we could operate with losing a basin. We do that typically to do maintenance at our plants already. We already have protocols on how to shift through that. And at Academy Creek, we are, the current engineering project going on down there to redo that plant. We're even going to add additional flexibility so that we can use basins in different configurations of what we do now to try to increase that flexibility.
And, you know, this might just be way off, you're probably thinking, well, what in the world are you talking about? But, you know, I think back to the flood of '94 in West Georgia, where, you know, there was gas stations where the pumps, I mean, the big 30,000 gallon gas tanks came flying up through the ground because they basically floated up out of the ground. And, you know, I'm thinking Dunbar over there is a big steel tank, and that steel tank's gonna float in 4 or 5 feet of water, or possibly. I mean, maybe it won't, but, you know,
Well,
something like that.
if the tank is full, it won't float, right?
You would hope it would not float
Yeah,
at that.
and, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
It could happen, I mean.
Yeah, I think the problem is you pump them down, and then they're a bubble.
That's my
And-
point, right?
Yeah, so
And if
you don't
something
pump them
happens-
down, you pump them full, maybe. I don't know, but protocol.
I will say, what you're talking about, if something were that to happen, we'd have a significant situation on our hands, and it would take, for that one basin to get back online, you're probably looking at least 6 to 8 weeks worth of work to get that done. And that's being optimistic about how quickly you could actually get started doing the work. Because not only are you gonna have problems there, you're gonna have problems throughout the rest of the system you're trying to take care of. And while that's a major problem, once you get the flow out of the rest of the system, you can handle that. So you'd be working through the rest of the system before you ever got to
Would
it.
you also have EPA problems that if a basin blew
You would
out?
have EPA problems from the standpoint of you'd be doing a whole lot of paperwork, but they have,
Hold you up with permits and that kind of, to keep you from,
they have clauses called upset clauses where if you have a substantial event like that, that is without, there's nothing you can do to prevent, then you're basically, it's not the correct wording for it, but it's basically a get out of jail free card on that because you've done everything you can and things happen.
yeah. But they're not waiting 6 weeks to issue the permit for you to begin the work.
No. That's one of those, in a prior life, I issued permits to people, and we had the responsibility of calling all the agencies that we were permitting after major events to see what was going on. And typically, the response was, we just want to know how we can help you. At that point, those agencies were trying to help you. They're not there to be the enforcement group. We coordinated a lot of help from other groups at that point. I've also, those are also not always fun phone calls because the guy on the other end is usually not in a good mood.
I know you're on the board of several, you know, the state committees and that kind
Right.
of stuff. That might be a good topic of, you know, what do
There
we
is,
do? What do Mexico Beach do? What are some of these places that really have these really, really big events? I mean, you know,
right, and one of the things that we are looking at, there are new risk assessment rules that we have to comply with. It's a couple of years down the road for a utility our size, but we'll be working through a lot of that stuff because of new federal regulations.
Anybody else got anything else? Well, y'all, those were very good updates, and we really appreciate the kind of the input and all the work that's gone into this. I mean, it's very evident that there's been a lot of thought and a lot of a lot of time put into making sure that we're well covered, and thank y'all for what we're doing. Nobody else, anything else? We'll close. Thank y'all.
Thank you.